for our fourth lecture on film and cultural apologetics. We're going to talk about why watch film, some reasons that the thoughtful cultural apologist wants to interact with movies, so some different ways. All of these are relevant at different times with regard to different films, and so I'm going to try and offer you a range of different possibilities for why one would want to interact with Hollywood movies. First off, again, cultural apologetics is about cultural awareness and speaking back to the culture. So there are these different reasons one might want to interact with culture. So awareness, getting new perspectives, understanding relevant parables, and even getting enlightenment and enrichment. And assuming you don't think film should be avoided, here are some of the common Christian reasons, and we'll use Johnston as a guide for understanding and situating these reasons. First off, with caution, we want to have cultural awareness. So Hollywood storytelling is a dominant form of narrative art, and studying these narratives can offer insight into the cultural landscape. So we want to pay attention, as Gould says, to how the world is working, what people are saying and thinking in order to be able to speak well. So even if you are wary, you want to understand what the culture is saying. Second, and connected to this, by studying Hollywood films, we can see common themes and interests that influence the culture. So we see this in like transformative power of romantic love, the struggle of the brave individual against a major threat, coming-of-age stories, revenge stories, fight for justice in the legal system. These are all really common Hollywood tropes, and so it's helpful to see and understand the kind of stories the culture is telling itself. Secondly, there's a value if you want to dialogue with Hollywood films to see. You get to see the world through new eyes. You get to understand somebody else. So C.S. Lewis talks about this as we read great literature, we get to see through the eyes of 1,000 different people, and yet we remain ourselves. And so this is a kind of a way of getting outside of our own windows, to use your window as a perspective, and see in for a change. But there's also, we encounter different worldviews as well, and we don't just want to take those on wholeheartedly. So, but through a film, we get to kind of entertain, as it were, a different way of thinking about the world. So again, Rear Window, we see one particular person's struggles, his questions about romantic love, his skepticism, and how he overcomes that. We shouldn't accept everything that we hear from the film, but we should at least try to understand it first. If we want to have a more positive account, we can see films as a kind of parable, so a way to recognize truths that have maybe become commonplace and we've forgotten about. So even if a film doesn't convey the whole truth, it can nevertheless convey a partial truth. And so we want to say that truth, wherever we encounter it, is God's truth, and because we believe in common grace and that there is wisdom out there in the world that Christians can access, we can take those pieces of truth and we encounter them. So, but parables often function by telling us the truth, but in a little bit of a different way than we expect. So when Nathan confronts David, for instance, he tells him a story about a rich man who stole a poor man's lamb. And then David becomes very angry, but then he realizes he is the man that Nathan is talking about, and he sees his own shame more clearly as a result of being told a story. Another way to think about this is through fantasy. We can kind of re-encounter reality. So G.K. Chesterton talks about this when he says in fairy stories we see the apples that are golden, and that kind of reminds us of the initial joy we had when we discovered that apples were green. So fairy tales can re-enchant reality. Fairy tales help to sort of give us that original experience again. So parables often kind of shock us by giving us something unexpected. And the most positive version of reason we watch films is that they can really kind of help us to see and understand the world better. So this doesn't apply to every movie, but really good movies, like really good novels or poems or stories, can help us to perceive the goodness of God, the world, and understand ourselves more clearly by watching them and encountering their narratives. couple of examples. So in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, we have a sort of a parable, a secularized version of transcendence, not with an encounter with God, but through these benevolent aliens. And so the heroes are receiving these messages, and they follow them. They practice a kind of faith in order to encounter something that at first seems threatening, but then they discover is actually beautiful. And so this is kind of like a parable for divine encounter. Likewise, and more directly in the Tree of Life, we see a meditation on the pain and difficulty of the world, the suffering of the world, and a meditation on sort of where is God in the midst of all of these things, and how can God repair all things in the end. And so we have this wonderful meditation on creation, on the goodness of the world, the pain of suffering, and how we can push past confusion and hope for the possibility of redemption at the end of all things.